Mr. Emery, first of all, explain the deal that's been brokered. What is it?
Well, the Americans have offered and demanded on a 10-year sentence, of which 5 would be served in custody, so I'd actually serve 5 years in the custody of the Canadian and American penal system, and then hopefully I would get released, but there's no guarantee of that. It's 5 years guaranteed incarceration and custody, and then a period after that I hope I can get out.
What happens to the other 5 years of the 10-year sentence?
Well, ultimately, hopefully I'll be able to get out on day parole.
How was this deal brokered?
Well, ultimately, my lawyers over the last 2 years have insisted there is no hope for me, that the Americans get everybody they ever seek, and that the Canadian government has signed these treaties that basically have outsourced our justice system to the Americans. So the Canadian police here couldn't get me on anything more than a $200 fine for selling seeds, and that wasn't enough to put me on ice, so they handed the file over to the DEA, who launched their investigation, and with a compliant puppet government in Ottawa, they basically sent me off to a prison term of, quite some considerable length, 5 years, for basically selling seeds which contain no drug quality, which are only a $200 fine here in Canada, and no one else has ever been charged for over 10 years now for selling seeds. Well, they said I was facing 10, 20 years, and more importantly, my 2 co-accused would be serving jail time in the United States, so hopefully I'll be able to spare them that. By taking this offer, this awful offer, I'll keep Michelle out of jail, and she has Crohn's disease, and her lawyer said that she would die in prison if she were sent away, so, that's pretty compelling pressure to accept some kind of deal, whereas normally I'd be very interested in challenging this and creating a political crisis in this country of some proportion anyway, to show that the Canadian government is selling off our sovereignty extremely quickly.
You must have known back before you were arrested in 2005 that this was inevitable, that at some point the United States government, the DEA, would want to try to make a point out of dealing with Marc Emery, did you not?
Oh yeah, I thought they would do that, although I always thought that, since I'm a Canadian citizen, I've always done this, there's nothing violent, there's no harm here, there's no victim, nobody's ever complained. Everybody in Canada was completely complicit in what I was doing because I never had a complaint in 11 years here. Every politician from Jack Layton, who came to my home, to Larry Campbell, who spoke at my conferences, to Sam Sullivan, who's my neighbor, everybody in this community has always known what I was doing. I paid all my taxes on this. I have no charges in Canada, no income tax investigations. I've been compliant and transparent in every possible way. So I just thought my country would regard me as a Canadian citizen and judge me before a Canadian jury under Canadian law with a Canadian judge and peers. But I am getting none of that. I'm being sent off to the United States, but I wouldn't get a trial here, I wouldn't get a jury here, I wouldn't get a Canadian judge to listen to the facts as to the case, so ultimately I'm being outsourced to the American judicial system. Well, the DEA has always made this claim that I'm the #1 drug trafficking kingpin in all Canada, not because of any drugs I've ever made or sold, but because of all these seeds I sold. But what did I do, really? I sent non-drug quality seeds to consenting adults over an invisible line, the U.S. border. I hurt no one. Hundreds of thousands of people around the world have been grateful to get these seeds. I've helped thousands of people. We gave away $4 million to charities and groups promoting peaceful democratic change around the world. I never kept any of this money. I paid taxes on it. I was completely transparent. So in other words, there was nothing sinister ever. And the American government, it's really all ideology versus my ideology. My ideology is get the people out of jail for marijuana, make marijuana legal, end the gangs and the crime associated with gangs and all the corruption that goes with it. And the American government's ideology is to maintain that system.
So what's going to happen on Monday?
Well, on Monday, my lawyer will probably ask for an adjournment so they can continue negotiations. And the judge will probably consider that, considering the extraditing state's got a very comprehensive offer. But it's a very punitive offer. I'm not allowed to own the magazine anymore. I have to be penniless when I report to jail. I have to report to jail immediately upon accepting this deal. And it's not like I own a lot now. The only thing I really own in the whole world is this magazine. I've never owned anything else. I've never owned any property or bonds or money or cash or anything. So that's not a concern. But the Americans make it so that I have to go to jail, a totally impoverished person, and can't own anything, and have to spend at least 5 years in jail. It's quite a considerable deal. In Canada, to get 5 years of actual custody, you'd need to be sentenced to 30 years in prison for a first-time non-violent federal offender to spend even 5 years. Because a Canadian non-violent first-time federal offender gets out on day parole at 1/6 of their their sentence. So if I were to get 10 years in Canada, I would be out in 20 months normally for day parole, and I can't even accept that. That's not available to me. The Americans have insisted that I'd be 5 years minimum in custody.
Why not just drag you through an extradition, which they stand a good chance of winning, and bring you to trial in Washington State?
Oh, but that would bring big social unrest. It really would. There's millions and millions of people who admire me around the world who are going to be very upset about even this 5-year deal. And many of them have, threatened civil disobedience for various kind of acts of opposition against the U.S. government. It would be very unpopular if the U.S. goes into an election year. We have a minority Canadian government. This spares them both from a very, meaningful look at how these two parties, the Republican Party in the United States and the Conservative Party in Canada, have very much become axes of evil of North America, and how they are in fact collaborating to undermine the sovereignty of perhaps both countries, but certainly of Canada's.
And you give up the magazine.
Yeah.
Which is...
Well, it's my life. Well, it's not so much what it's worth. It's not worth a lot financially, but it's been going on for 14 years, and it's my baby, and it's worth a lot to the movement. It's worth a lot to the people. It doesn't have a lot of financial value, but I have to divest myself of everything because, the DEA considers everything the proceeds of crime, even though I never kept anything, and the proceeds of crime were the $4 million I gave out to all the charity groups, including drug addiction clinics. I paid for even the proportional representation ballot initiative in British Columbia in 2001. I gave $8,000 to the Green Party to pay for that. So the $4 million I gave away went to places all over the world, Supreme Court challenges, class action suits against the U.S. federal government, wonderful, wonderful things. So that's how we laundered the money. We gave it away to all these activist groups around the world.
I heard you describe yourself as a martyr. I think at one point I even heard you say that you had been anointed by God to do this.
Yeah.
Why do you think?
Oh, I've felt that this is my very unique destiny for over 30 years now. I've been thinking of nothing but this, the time to get people out of jails around the world, to make marijuana legal, to end this kind of horrible pogrom we all experience all over the world. And it's gone on for 35, 40 years. So one day in my garden I felt just somehow that I had a calling, and then for 30 years since I've been doing this. And I believe I'm quite a man of destiny, a person of destiny that's meant to do this, and if I have to sacrifice and spend years in jail, it's meant to happen too. By the way, organized commercial outfits don't use seeds for marijuana, so the idea that organized crime was using my seed is ridiculous, because they use cuttings. It adds an extra 3 months of time on to use seeds, so only beginners are going to start out with seeds. And there's no reason to believe that any organized crime gang ever did business with me. It's insane. You'd have to order in the mail, give me your name and address to a complete stranger and have me send you seeds, and if you're an organized syndicate, you wouldn't be that open. The people who sent me money were beginners or people with a medical problem who needed seeds to start growing. This was their first grow in 95% of all the cases.
And in the last 2 years, have you sent seeds over the border?
Oh, my bail conditions have forbidden me, so I haven't been in the seed business for almost 2.5 years now.
I also couldn't talk to you on a cell phone, because I understand this.
And there's a variety of restrictions. I have to get permission to leave British Columbia. My whereabouts at all times are monitored by the United States government. If I leave this province, they need to know everywhere I am. Oh yeah, well they escorted, when they were arresting me, there was a DEA agent beside me at all times, in Halifax and in Vancouver here.
So what's the last couple of years been like for you?
Oh, well, I've been very pleasant. I've enjoyed the time with my wife. We've gotten our magazine to a worldwide stage. I've managed to keep our activism, on the largest scale it's ever been. And if anything, I've gotten a lot of A-list media interviews with 60 Minutes, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Australian Broadcast Service. So everybody has investigated me, from the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times to 60 Minutes, and they found that I'm exactly what I say I am. And that's my most pleasing thing that I can go to jail with, is that everything I ever said was true is true, and everybody's always found that to be the case.